Today we're going to be looking at the 2 to 5 player game from Inside Up Games, Perch. Now, on its cover, this looks like a bunch of happy backyard birds, very friendly, getting along and playing nicely. However, it turns out that these birds are backstabbing, conniving, and ferocious. This is a game all about competitive shenanigans. Let's take a closer look. Perch is a modular game, which means that every game you're going to be setting up a different set of tiles in a new configuration, giving you a new game every single time. There are 5 rounds of gameplay. In each round, the game starts with a migration phase during which players are going to add 2 birds of their own color into a baggie. Then there is a recruit phase where every player is going to take 2 of their own colored birds and then draw 2 randomly from the bag. So altogether, each player is going to have 4 birds where no less than 2 birds are their own color. Then there is the perch phase. During this phase, each player takes a turn placing 1 bird, could be their color or an opponent's color, in any location. So players take turns doing this until everyone has placed all 4 birds. And then there's an upkeep phase where all of these tiles are scored. Now, the game has many different tiles and many different effects for each one. Even the scoring is very different. In many of the cases, the player with the most birds gets the most points, but in some cases, the player with the second most birds or the fewest birds gets the most points. It's different from tile to tile. Now, when you're scoring these tiles, in cases where there is a tie for the most birds, the tied players receive nothing. So, for example, in a tile where there are points for first, second, and third most birds, if the first and second player are tied for first place, then they receive nothing, and the player who has the third most birds will receive points for third place. So this gets resolved and scoring takes place, and some tiles will have the effect of giving a player control of a creature. Now, each creature has different movement rules and a different effect. These come into play in the second round of play, which is exactly the same as the first. Players are placing 4 birds again, but this time, as a bonus action, a player can move one of the creatures they control and enact that creature's effect. So in some cases, the effect is to move a bird from one tile to another tile, and in other cases, it means exterminating a bird. Now, in this game, the birds that are exterminated, they go to the fountain, which I like to call bird heaven. The fountain is interesting though, because these birds are not removed from the game. Rather, they secure a spot in the fountain which is scored at the end of the game. The fountain has many tiers to it. Birds in a higher position are going to be worth more points at the end of the game. So this affects player decision making because sometimes it can be advantageous for you to off your own bird if it can score more points in the fountain than it can make for you by scoring those area majorities. That is how creatures work. There are 2 other factors in decision making in this game. At the beginning of the 4th round, every player receives a birdhouse. A birdhouse can also be used as a bonus action to be placed on top of any stack of birds, and once that's done, that stack is secure for the rest of the game. No more birds can be added, and no more birds can be offed. Then, finally, at the beginning of the 5th round, every player receives 1 lightning bolt. A lightning bolt can be used to zap any bird and send it to the fountain. And again, you can even zap your own bird if you want those points at the high tiers in the fountain. That's how you play the game, although in practice there are few things that are really cool that don't really pop out when you're just reading the rules. One is that because the migration phase happens before the perch phase, every player is aware what every other player has already drawn. And you know the turn order, so you can look at the player who's going after you and you can see whether or not they have a bird of a color that could create a tie anywhere on the board. So if you can look at this and say, well gosh, if they place it right here, that's going to make a tie with me and the person in second place, and then I'll get nothing. So then you can be proactive about it. In order to prevent a tie from happening, you can put yourself there in order to have an overwhelming majority so that the player after you has nothing they can do to deprive you of those points. I think it's a really cool piece of the game, and I wouldn't want you to miss that. But that said, let me tell you a little bit about what I liked about the game and what I don't like about the game. So, starting with what I do like. I love that the game is so modular. It has lots of tiles. There are basic tiles, there are special tiles, there are creature tiles, there are multiple creatures. Secondly, I think the game is just really funny. You're attacking birds with cats. Birds are going to the fountain. They're going to bird heaven. I think the game is hilarious. I played this with my brothers at Essen last year, and we were laughing the entire time. Not just because the game is itself funny, but also because the kinds of things that you can do to surprise your opponents, the shenanigans you can get up to, the ways that you can creatively move things around. Maybe you've got the dog. The dog lets you move a bird from one tile to another tile, and you can really surprise people with different kinds of plots that you can kind of devise on your turn. I also like how turn order is done in this game, because in this game, going first is actually a disadvantage. So to have the most points and you have to go first, sometimes that can be a real game changer, because really it's the player who has the last action who can change the outcome of multiple tiles just with the clever use of a creature or a really smart placement of a bird. There are a few things I don't like about the game, however. First one, minor note, but nevertheless, the rulebook recommends that for your first game you should play without objectives. If you do that, then you also then have to play the game with objectives, because my criticism is the first couple of rounds of the game can feel a bit aimless. It's not very exciting to pursue just area majorities. It's a lot more interesting to have some sort of objective. So just to read you a few of them. Have the fourth most birds on at least 3 locations of your choice. That requires some ingenuity. How do you get the fourth most number of birds? Have the most birds on 3 or more locations in a diagonal line. Place at least 2 birds from your flock on 3 or more locations in a column of your choice. Okay, so objectives like this, just something else to aim for. I think it makes your turn a little bit more interesting. That's hardly a criticism, though, really just a minor note. Getting a little deeper into things that really bug me, the scoring of the game really takes a lot of time. There are 5 rounds of play, and there are 5 rounds of scoring. And with more players, you have more tiles, which means there's more that you have to count up and resolve. This is the biggest reason also why this didn't go over very well with my own kids. I love playing this with my adult brothers. I'll talk about that in a minute, but when I played it with my kids, just to see if this was something that they would like, the scoring each round really, they really lost interest during that part of it. Next, I don't know if I would really call this a true strategy game. I have to put on a different hat when I'm playing this game. This is a game about laughs and fun and sort of just being a brat to your opponents. And it's a different kind of experience. It's not normally the kind of game I like. I do think this one's a lot of fun, but it's not really a strategy game. It kind of, I don't know. Is that a criticism? I don't know. It's just not the kind of game, but it's still a really good game for what it is. My next criticism has to do with kind of a lack of interaction and, again, the pacing of the game. When it's not your turn, there's nothing that you can really do. You can observe and you can kind of try to convince people what you think they should do, but it's not interactive. There's nothing to do while you're waiting. Also, the bonus actions, you can perform a bonus action on your turn, but I kind of wish that there was a creature or some sort of cards or something that you could do in order to interrupt on somebody else's turn. Like in other games, there's like a stop card, right? Like, oh no, I forbid you from doing that, right? Like you could play a card from your hand that interferes with your opponents. Something to draw you in so that you're not just waiting for your next turn, which is the case in this game. And then lastly, my biggest criticism is the components. The components, they look great, but they are not functional and they don't serve the gameplay well. In theory, you're supposed to stack your birds like this. and they stack up. You can stack them as high as you want because there's no limit to the stack on tile. However, the stacks are very sticky, so if you have to remove a bird, you have to lift the entire thing and pull it apart with 2 hands. That's not helpful. And more importantly, there's no functional reason why the birds have to stack. You could just as easily put tokens on a tile. Tokens would be easier to add to a tile, and they would be easier to remove from the tile. This is a game where the number of birds, the flock on every tile, is going to be changing constantly. The pieces need to be supportive for being easy to move. These stacks are almost like Legos. They stick together, they stick well. To that point, that's great. But the problem is, this is not a game where pieces are supposed to stick there. You're supposed to be able to move them. Why did they make pieces that are so sticky and pieces that are finicky? It's not necessary. I feel like they did it to get attention. Like, look how pretty this game is, but it's pretty without adding to the functionality of the pieces. I really was bothered by that. So those are my criticisms. All in all, I think this is a riot. I think this was so much fun to play with my brothers. This was probably one of our favorite games at Essen last year, just because we laughed and we had fun playing it. They're going to be visiting me this summer, and I'm going to be playing this game over and over again. I do not recommend this game for families with kids, because I think that the scoring slows the game down too much. I think it requires that you are invested and competitive in order to endure the scoring that has to happen 5 times. But some of the elements, the fountain, the recruiting phase that happens before the perch phase, there are so many clever ways to make this game distinct so that it's not like other competitive games of this nature. And I think that aside from the fact the bird tokens, they bother me, but you know what? I just don't stack them when I play. I just put them in a little pile because I don't want to stack them. And that's fine. You can do that. Just feel like it's silly that they made them to be so nice when you don't need them that way. But anyway, it's a game that I definitely do recommend. I would like an expansion for this game as well. So, good overall. Some small criticisms, but not enough to ruin the game for me. The game Perch.